In this video, I'm going to be reacting to some of your hottest takes on Universal Studios Florida. These hot takes were all submitted by my viewers, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out next time. All that said, let's get these hot takes started. Escape from Gringotts is better than Forbidden Journey. There's a lot to love with Escape from Gringotts. The queue is massive, with a unique pre-show and great theming all around. The ride also has some really thrilling elements, like the launch at the end and the tilt track at the start. Despite all that, the core of the ride itself just doesn't really appeal to me. While the theming is nice and all, there's just so many screens throughout the entire attraction. There's some attempts to try and simulate motion, but even compared to something like Minion Mayhem, it just isn't doing very much. In comparison, while I don't love the screen sections on Forbidden Journey, it does at least feel like an effective simulator. The screens aren't quite as bright and high quality, but it feels like you're moving around a lot more in comparison. However, the rest of Forbidden Journey is really where it shines. The ride truly brings you into the world of Harry Potter with a unique ride system and plenty of practical set pieces. It just feels so action-packed and special, whereas Escape from Gringotts doesn't come together quite as well in my opinion. The queues are pretty neck and neck though, and I do love looking down at the track to see how Gringotts works. Still, for me, Forbidden Journey is quite a bit ahead of Escape from Gringotts overall. Escape from Gringotts is better than Revenge of the Mummy. I can sort of see the argument for this, but I still have to disagree. Mummy may have a bit less theming when it comes to the coaster section, but it makes up for that by being far more thrilling. The thrills combined with the great dark ride sections make for one of the best rides in the entire resort. However, for those who prefer more of a dark ride than a roller coaster, I can see how you'd prefer Gringotts. Personally though, Mummy is far ahead for me. It's not only a fantastic ride, but one of the most iconic at Universal Studios. Butterbeer tastes terrible. I completely agree. To be fair though, the only drinks I really like are water and lemonade. The fizziness of soda is just gross to me, and unfortunately that carbonation is also found within butterbeer. However, I also think the flavor is kind of nasty too. It isn't very sweet and just tastes somewhat off. Despite all that though, I love butterbeer ice cream. If you're like me and hate butterbeer, try out the ice cream. It's very sweet and has this sort of caramel taste. It's definitely worth it. Transformers The Ride 3D is better than The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man. This is a heavily debated battle because of how similar these two rides are, and one that I've thought about a lot from time to time. I went on Transformers again fairly recently, and I have to admit that I like it less and less every time I do. There's just so much of this ride where you meander around doing nothing in particular, and whenever stuff does happen, it just feels like visual nonsense. All of the practical effects are a huge downgrade from Spider-Man, with the lack of any fire effect feeling particularly noticeable. The realistic city set pieces don't really work for me either, feeling a bit bland when compared to the colorful New York scene in Spider-Man. Overall, while Transformers keeps falling down in my Universal ride ranking, Spider-Man keeps getting closer and closer to the top 3. I can see how Transformers appeals to some, but personally, I don't really love it. E.T. should be replaced. I don't know if it should be, but it probably will be. E.T. as a franchise isn't quite as popular as it once was, and this ride does feel noticeably older than many other attractions at the park. Not to mention, with the transformation of Kid Zone into a DreamWorks themed land, this ride may eventually be the subject of a DreamWorks retheme. Still, I would hate to see it go. While I'm not a die-hard fan of this attraction, I still really enjoy it. The forest sequence still holds up to this day, and while the remainder of the ride has a bit of a messy story, it's still great to see a ride in this park with more animatronics than screens. E.T. may not be the powerhouse of an IP it once was, but it still holds some cultural relevance as one of Spielberg's most iconic films. I can't say that I don't see this being replaced in the future, but I would hate to see it go. Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit is great. I do think Rip Ride Rockit gets a bit more hate than it deserves, but I wouldn't exactly call it great. While I love playing Movin' Right Along on a roller coaster, the music theme of this ride is a bit convoluted. As for the coaster itself, while I don't think it's quite as rough as many people say, it's certainly a bit janky. The constant brake runs still annoy me to this day, and the restraints are extremely bulky. Still, it's not an awful ride. There are some thrills to be found, like the airtime off the many brake runs. However, if I had the choice between this and a B&M Mini Hyper like Hollywood Dream in Japan, I'd take the latter in a heartbeat. Rip Ride Rockit is alright, but it's definitely one of the weaker coasters in Florida. Maybe that's just because of how good the lineup is down here, but still. The Simpsons Ride is the worst ride at Universal, even worse than Fast and Furious. I will say, on my most recent visit, I finally felt a hint of that Simpsons motion sickness that everyone talks about. It wasn't too bad to be fair, but as someone who rarely experiences motion sickness, it did feel surprisingly noticeable. If you're someone who's susceptible to that, I could totally understand why this ride would be the worst at the resort. However, ignoring its adverse effects, I can't see how this is worse than Fast and Furious. The only real point I could give Supercharged here is the pre-shows, which are mostly entertaining because of the incredible cast members who work there. The ride itself, though, is just a complete disaster. While The Simpsons is a bit of a standard simulator, it does at least have a bit of humor to keep it entertaining. Neither ride is particularly great or anything, but I do think I take the side of The Simpsons here. I have seen worse rides than Fast and Furious. This is also true. I would say there are worse rides out there than Fast and Furious, but it is quite easily the worst ride at Universal Studios. There's another ride I've been on recently that may just be my new least favorite, but I'll save that for a future video. Still, I'd have to agree that Fast and Furious isn't like the worst thing out there. Fast and Furious Supercharged is one of, if not the best ride at Universal. I couldn't disagree more. Again, the pre-shows are funny and the queue is kind of cool, but that's all I can list in terms of pros. I feel like even the biggest Fast and Furious fans can admit this isn't a great adaptation of the franchise. If you like it, more power to you, but it's far from the best ride in the park in my eyes. That's all for the first entry of this new series. For my personal thoughts on Universal Studios, check out my tier list of every attraction at the park. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.